All right, shalom, shalom. First things first, I'm going to give honor and praise unto Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahushai, Bahashem Rachakurash. Say, Barakati Yahweh, Barakati Yahushai, Barakati Yahweh, Barakati Yahushai, Barakati Yahweh, Barakati Yahushai, Bahashem Rachakurash. And we give double honor to our apostles and our elders, which are the apostle elders, a great millstone, which feed us with knowledge, wisdom, and understanding through the spirit and power of Yahweh Yahushai. 2025, which is the hopeful year of our deliverance and the judgment of Esau. All right. We're coming to some beautiful times, some very hard times. We have this this new financial system that they're getting ready to roll out. Not trying to, they're getting ready to roll it out. So the time is that all these things that these guys are bringing up. Now this is concerning the IUIC with their different dogmas and doctrines that they're pulling out. And the fact that we have to keep going over this is because that they continue to add to the scriptures. They continue to take from the scriptures to fit their own needs and to fit their own agenda. And that reminds me, because I was watching Apostles and Elders video concerning the situation. And the one thing that came to my mind is that the Lord was cursing out the wicked Sadducees and Pharisees for the same thing that they're doing now. Okay, because that's why I believe in the spirit that these are those men coming back in the reincarnation to serve out their lot. They're serving this. They have the same spirit. That's why it says the spirit bear witness that we are the children of Israel. Okay, so it says the spirit of the prophets is subject unto the prophets. So the spirit of these guys coming back are subject unto themselves. Just like you can tell a man, how are men being able to say, okay, this might be this person, or this might be this person coming back, is their attributes, their characteristics, even if that person themselves did not assume that they were that person, but what they were doing pointed to that they had to be that person. All right. Same thing with Moses, saying Elijah, with Solomon coming back. All right. That's why Yahushua was able to say, here's one that is greater than Solomon, because he was Solomon and he was greater because he knew more and had more understanding than when he was King Solomon. Okay, when he came back as Yahushua, as that lamb that was set up for the reconciliation of the Israelites, with namely the elect first, and it was going to transcend to the nation of Israel. So the scriptures say all Israel shall be saved. So I found this article where it says the woes of the Pharisees. The woes of the Pharisees is I've heard of the scriptures that they're bringing out, but I didn't know that it was actually a title and a subheading concerning Yahushua dealing with these the Sadducees and Pharisees, the scribes and Pharisees. Okay, which the Pharisees and the scribes were a sect. They were a position that was held in the temple. So there was, not all were wicked, not all were off, because there were some that followed Yahushua's understanding and followed his lead. Okay, and believe that he was the Messiah. Okay, and you can see now that you have a split where you have those that believe in this truth and those that don't believe in the full 100% truth. And the same thing was going on back in the time of Yahushua. That's why this would have to be that generation coming back, serving out their lot. Okay, you have the camp of Yahushua, and you have the Sadducees and Pharisees. That's why the Lord has woken up the Israelites. The Lord said that the kingdom of heaven is likened unto a net that was drawn out. It casts it good and the bad. Okay, so the Lord is going to wake up those that he wants, those that he doesn't want. But it says many are called, but few are chosen. Okay, so let's jump into this. This is called the woes of the Pharisees. Okay, the woes of the Pharisees. Woes of the Pharisees are a series of criticisms by Yahushua against scribes and Pharisees. So this goes out to all you guys saying that we ain't supposed to rebuke, we're supposed to just stay in our lane, or we're not supposed to call these guys out concerning certain things. But look, the Lord himself called the Sadducees and Pharisees out for the wickedness that they were doing. So much so that it was actually titled the Woes of the Pharisees. It says Yahushua against the scribes and the Pharisees, recorded in Luke 11 and 37 to 54, and Matthew 21 to 1 to 39, Mark 12 to 35 to 40, and Luke 20, 45 to 47. It says also includes warnings about scribes. It says 8 are listed in Matthew's, and hence Matthew's version is known as the 8 woes. These are found in Matthew's 23 verses 13, 16, 23, 25, 27, and 29. It says only 6 are given in Luke. Woes, whose version is thus known as the 6 woes. 3 are described to the Pharisees and 3 to the scribes. The woes mostly critiques the Pharisees for hypocrisy and perjury. They illustrate the difference between inner and outer moral states. And that's what we doing now, because all the things that we're cutting these guys on and we're rebuking them on is things that they ought not to be teaching. All right, they're subverting whole households. They're telling you that you have to cut your woman off after a year if she doesn't convert unto your belief, which is that's not in the scriptures. Because it says unbelieving wife and unbelieving husband is there for a reason. That's why they're taken away from the scriptures itself and given those situations for their own needs. If a guy's in there, he has to convert his wife. But if a woman's in there, definitely, because they're looking to, you know what I'm saying, the thirst is real. We'll just say that. But they're filleting the skin off of Jake, and they're taking the hope away from Israelites by telling them that there's a hell that you can burn in forever if you don't so-called believe their doctrine, or if you don't stay on the heels of what they believe. That means you can fall to the wayside. And that's not how the scriptures pointed out, that you don't have to use hillbilly Hebrew. We have hillbilly Hebrew, but on the same mouth and the same breath, they have Hebrew names. And they'll go into the Hebrew when it fits their needs, or if they're supposedly doing some kind of debate, or if they're going against somebody that they need to prove a point, they'll use the Hebrew then. But that's nitpicking. You're supposed to use something all the way, okay? But it says the context and the background. The woes are mentioned twice in the narrative in the Gospels of Matthew and Luke. In Matthew's, they are mentioned after Yahushua triumphal entries into Jerusalem, where he teaches in the temple, while in Luke, they are mentioned after the Lord's Prayer is given and the disciples are first sent out over the land. Before introducing the woes, Matthew states that Yahushua criticizes them for taking the place of honor at banquets, for wearing, what is that? Let's look it up. Let's look it up. Hold on. Let's look it up. Search the web. It says characterized. Let's play it.
Ostentatious.
And that's Nate, man. Them garments he comes in with, those are ostentatious garments. Okay, those look like they from the time machine. They ain't even from this era. Okay, they look like a spirit went and grabbed them from the ancient world and brought them back to now. It says characterized by vulgar or pretentious displays designed to impress or attract notice. And you clearly can see that, man. You clearly can see that with IUIC's garments. We don't have to go to it. You can clearly see that. Hold on, I'll do this. Hold on, watch this. Let's see this. IUIC Passovers. Let's just do that. Now let's see if this fits. Look. Look at the garment. Winner. See the garment? Okay. That's 1 year. See the garments? Oh, I guess that's one of the men that didn't make it. Oh, there's Ayathan. You can see the garments. Let's see how much these are. Let's see if there's a price. We ain't gonna go into the price. But you can clearly see that these garments are defined as what?
Ostentatious.
It says characterized by vulgar or pretentious display designed to impress or attract notice. It says Let's see here. Let's pull up. It says attracting or seeking to attract attention, admiration, or even often by what is it? Godness or observation? What was that? Observation or observious? Hold on. Salakia. Let's look this word up. And it says overly elaborate. See? Overly elaborate or conspicuous, characterized by founding or inventing. But the main point is garments that stand out. So like if we're not pronouncing those words. We're not, scholar, or we're not professors of English language over here. So we try. Look it up, Jake. You brothers can look it up and see what. See if you can pronounce it, look up the definitions. But that's describing exactly what these guys put on. They want to wear those gay clothings, those clothings that make them stand out. Okay? And it says, woes are all, hold on. While Luke there mentioned after the Lord's Prayer, Yahushua criticized them for taking the place of banquet and honor and wearing ostentatious clothing. That's exactly what they're doing now, because that's them. That's why it's in their spirit to wear those kind of garments and to wear that elaborate clothing, because they did it back in the reincarnation when they're in the time of Yahushua. When we were in our temple, we somewhat had some status with the Roman Empire. We had our own, but we just had to pay taxes. Okay. And it says for wearing clothing, for encouraging people to call them rabbi, teacher. Okay. It says the woes are all woes of hypocrisy and illustrates the difference between the inner and outer moral states. Yahushua portrays the Pharisees as impatient with outward rituals, observing which made them look acceptable and virtuous outwardly, but left the inner person unreformed. And that's what you see. That's why they had guys that were committing adultery in their class or in their supposed meetings. A guy was committing adultery with another man's woman. He was sending pictures of his rod to the other woman, and while he saluted the guy, that's a thing of the world. That's not a reformed person. But outwardly they looked at us and called us bums. They called us this. They called us that. But on the same breath, you got guys that are doing these things. All right, that they're pushing these narratives, and they're not coming in the spirit of Yahbashim Yahushai in brotherly love. That's not brotherly love to pop a man's wife, but then take pictures of your rod and send it to her while you're in a man's meeting. So you're pretty much stealing from your brother, And it also says you're not supposed to offer nothing to the Lord if you have a ought with your brother. You're supposed to lay down the sacrifice and then go make good with your brother. So they were doing things that were not expedient. They were doing things that were not lawful in their own ranks. But they look at us and tell us that we're off, because we're not doing exactly what they're doing. But they're not perfect. They're not righteous when it comes to certain things. And then what did Nate say? He said, "Oh, I like hearing nasty things like this." Nasty Nate. No man, you put another man's business. That's a man that's family's ruined. That now he can look at the truth and think it's off. He brought his woman to learn and to supposedly have some kind of family morals, but then he finds out a man is popping his wife and talking to his wife like that. That's why you don't have women around. Women stay at home because women are like children, man. They don't mature beyond a certain age. Look at it today. Look at these women that have been left to themselves. What do they do with it? All these rights that they supposedly want. And I ain't talking to sisters that, are trying in this truth, that are, coming down and humbling down. This ain't, like it says, if the shoe don't fit, don't wear it. But I'm talking about to the broad spectrum of women in the modern day. What have they done with the freedom beyond being promiscuous, be hoes, sleep with a bunch of men, don't take care of the household, all these women talking about they independent, but you on food stamps. If you don't have Esau providing you food stamps and a way for you to eat without a man being in your house or a man being in your life, you wouldn't be prospering the way you are. But they get proud because they can lean on this society because it has a bunch of extra goodies for them if they're supposedly single and out there on their own. Okay, but that's why they're making enough money to barely make it, and you have to be under the poverty line to receive these benefits. So you're not really progressing. You're on a what does it say, a perpetual even basis, if not below the line. Okay, where men would have to buckle up their bootstraps and they get somewhere. They'll start a business low, they'll start a job at a lower level, and they'll build themselves up to management or a higher position. Okay, so men really have to get it out the mud. But these are the 7 woes. Let's jump into one. I found an article that has them a little bit plainer, but let's read here. It says, what are the 7 woes of Matthews? It says in Matthew 23, Yahushua pronounces 7 woes unto the religious leaders of his day. A woe is an exclamation or grief, similar to what is expressed by the word alas. And pronounced woes, Yahushua was prophesying judgment on the religious elite who were get guilty of hypocrisy. So just like the Lord was pronouncing judgment on them, when did that judgment come to pass? These things did not come to pass in the time of Yahushua. Certain things did when the temple was sacked, but the prophecies, because what was one of the prophecies that Yahushua said that hasn't come to pass? It says that you shall see me come with the thousands of angels. And when is that? That's the great and notable day of the Lord. So that day did not happen yet. So it's coming in these times. The times that we're living in now is the times where that judgment is going to come down upon these Edomites and upon these wicked Israelites, 2/3 of our people in Babylon. So that's why if you're in Babylon, you're set for judgment or you're set for salvation. You're here for a reason. That's why Nero's back. Okay, that's why Nero's back, because he has judgment and he has to pay for the blood that he spilled. He spilled some of the disciples' blood. So now he's here to go through that judgment that was promised to him in the past, in the time of Yahushua. Okay, in the time of the disciples, in the time of the prophesying of the downfall of the beast, which is coming back. Okay, the beast is healed. The wound that was healed is the Roman Empire. That's who the beast is. That's why it's a mark of the beast. Just like when you hear NATO and the EU, you have them having their power and their pull or their supposed outline of their rulership is based upon the Roman Empire. So let's go ahead and read this. And it says, woe. It says the King James Version and some other translations list 8 woes in Matthew 23. But older manuscripts leave out verse 14, in which the scribes and Pharisees are condemned by taking advantage of widows and making lengthy prayers for show. Elsewhere, Yahushua speaks against those very sins. Mark 12 and 40. Let's pull that up. It says, who devour widows' houses for a pretense, making long prayers, they will receive greater condemnation. Because we remember the time where Kanai the conniver, he stole from the man named the Pocket. They had a falling out, and they kicked Kanai out because it was wrong. If you guys are so spot, there's nothing wrong in your organization. Why'd you have to kick Kanai out? Why did the lemur, why did he get kicked out for adultery? If you guys are supposed to be these spotless guys in the law, why are your guys getting taken out for things that are breaking the law? Because that's why it says there that you guys were outwardly you looked the part, but inwardly you haven't changed, you haven't reformed, you haven't put on that new man. All right. And it says, see that Mark, and it says Luke 20 and verse 47. It says, who devour widows' houses for a pretense, make long prayers, they will receive a greater condemnation. And what's one of their prayers? They prayed for the apostles. But why did they do that? They had a what does it say? They had a means, or they had an ulterior motive, because they wanted to get Kanai back in there. So their followers, they didn't want to displease their followers by bringing Kanai back in there after Kanai did the man wrong in their own congregation. So they had to pray for the apostles and elders, because it was a subconscious act they did, because their people hated us so much, or they paint us as the men of Great Millstone, starting with the apostles and elders, so bad that they said if we can forgive them, then we can forgive our brother Kanai, and we can bring Kanai back in, because we pray for the worst of the worst, the rapers. That's the wicked ass thing they did, man. And that's what you can fool some people some of the time. You can't fool everybody all the time, because we have been around. Certain brothers have been around to watch you do these things. Same thing Yahushua watched the Sadducees and Pharisees do what they did. He went to the Passovers. His parents took him to the Passover. I had an example of that. When he was of age, he was in the temple. His parents were looking for him, and he was in the temple. He said, "I must be about my father's business," the famous line. So he knew about Passovers. He knew what was going on. He knew what they were doing. So he went and asked them and asked questions. He's always had that spirit on him. That's why he grew up and he had that same spirit, because he knew them. He didn't just come out of Jerusalem one day and didn't know the temple and didn't know how they acted. They've been doing that for generations. They did it so long that they did it when he was a kid, but he wasn't fully grown in the scriptures and as a man, be able to stand on his 10 toes to be able to go against them. So he watched him. He knew him very well. Just like your uncle, he always steals shit. Or your cousin, he ain't dependable. Then he knew them. He grew up with them. He's seen the different men come in and out of the high priest position. Okay? And it says widows make lengthy prayers. It says the seven woes are addressed to the teachers of the law and Pharisees. In one of the woes, he calls them blind guides. Let's pull that. This is Matthew's 23 and 16. Woe to you, blind guides. And what are we telling these guys? You guys are blind, man. You lead your flock into darkness. You're not telling them of the MOTB. You're not telling them of Jacob's trouble. You're not telling them of these things. Those include in sight, vision. Okay? The truth shall set you free. This truth gives you eye salve. It gives you the oil, the see. Just like the apostle brings out, why does an owl see in the dark in the night? Because night vision is oil. It secretes oil in his eyes that allows it to see in darkness, to illuminate the darkness. And it says woe to you, blind guides, who say, if anyone swears by the temple, it is nothing, but if anyone swears by the gold of the temple, he is bound to his oath. So money, not the temple, but the charms, the trinkets. See that? And that's what you're seeing now. It's if you paying your tithes, you in good standings, you all right. They were adding, man. It says at the end of his denunciation, he calls them snakes and brood of vipers. That's why John had the same thing. John was his cousin. They knew. It was a well-known thing in Israel that the temple was corrupt. They were doing some bullshit. Herod was an Edomite. So it was in shambles, man. It was in shambles. Let's call it how it is. When Yahushua came on the scene, he was gonna shake things up, because everybody was comfortable in bullshit. The temple was compromised. Herod was an Edomite. So you had a Idumean ruling over Jerusalem. He had his own private army, so he was doing bullshit. They were breaking the law. So Israel was in shambles. It wasn't a good state that we were in when the Messiah came on the scene. Okay? And it says they had been following him to test him and try to trick him with questions about divorce. Okay, we all know these scriptures, about paying taxes to Caesar, about resurrections, and about greater condemnation of the law. Yahushua professed his 7 woes by explaining to disciples that they should obey the teachings of the Jewish leaders as they taught the law of Yahweh, but not to emulate their behaviors, because they did not practice what they preached. And that's what we're telling them now. Nate and them aren't practicing what they preach, man. They are not doing that. Okay? First of Yahushua's 7 woes condemned the scribes and Pharisees for keeping people out of the kingdom of heaven Woe to you, teachers of the law, Pharisees, you hypocrites! You shut the door of the kingdom of heaven to people's faces. You yourselves do not enter, nor will you let those enter also whom are trying to. See? This is Matthew 23 and verse 13. But woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you shut up the kingdom of heaven. And that's what you're telling guys now. You're going to hell. The fuck is a hell, man? Ain't no hell. Hell's not a real place, man. We're in hell. We are living through our hell right now concerning the slavery, concerning us leaving our knowledge, wisdom, and understanding and being thrown into darkness and bondage under our captives, man. That's the hell we're going through. There's no mystical place where you burn forever, man. That's a fable. And it says, for you neither enter yourselves nor allow those who would enter to go in. And that's what it's telling you guys now. If you guys fit this label and you fall under the same spirit the Sadducees and Pharisees did, you ain't making it, man. Because this has to be what making it. The kingdom of heaven is when Yahushua delivers the elect out of bondage and the destruction that's coming to Babylon the Great. That's how you're going to enter into the kingdom of heaven. The kingdom of heaven is within you. That's why the Lord said that he's going to call up the elect into the chambers. That's the wedding right there. That's also known as the kingdom of heaven. It says, because they're not going to make it. You didn't believe Yahushua when he was around, so you ain't going to be delivered by him, man. And what's the main thing? If you take that marky mark, you definitely ain't going to be delivered. You're going to be judged under the law that is written. If you take the mark, then you're going to be judged by it, man. And it says, Yahushua, then it says the Pharisees were effectively refusing to enter the kingdom of heaven. And it says they also hindered the common people from believing in him, thereby blocking the way to heaven for others. Repentance and faith in Mashiach is the door to admission into the kingdom, and nothing could be more disagreeable to the Pharisees, who saw no need for repentance in their own lives and attempted to justify themselves by strict adherence to the law. And that's what they're doing now. They telling you that you don't need to obey the law. You don't need to obey Yahushua. You don't need to call upon his name and think that's how you're going to get into the kingdom of heaven. But you ain't going to get into the kingdom of heaven because you ain't going through Yahushua. They're saying that you don't have to use the name, that you can call any name under the sun, that you can do whatever you want to do concerning the so-called law. The law is not going to save you, man. You can do the law as much as you can, but that's not going to bring you into the kingdom of heaven. Okay? The only way you're going to go into the kingdom of heaven is through the belief of Yahweh Bashem Yahushua and having his name and having his son's name in your heart. That's how you're going to get in the kingdom. You ain't going to get in on your own regard. You're going to do it by the law. You're going to fail because there's no way that you can be able to do the law perfectly. And that's the only way you can be justified by the law, by doing all the laws perfectly. The same way Yahushua was justified by being the lamb because he was the lamb without blemish, without spot. So that's how he was able to be that, okay? And there's that one. It says the second woe is Yahushua condemning the leaders and teachers, leaders for teaching their converts to saying the same hypocrisy that they themselves practice. They led their converts into religious works, but not into true righteousness, making them twice as much the child of hell. And this is one of my favorite scriptures. It says, for the people's heart has grown dull, and with their ears they can barely hear, and their eyes they have closed, lest they should see with their eyes. And that's what these guys are lost. That's why they're going on Saint and Sinner podcast talking about you if you have multiple wives, you sinning. And then because he's regurgitating what Nate said, he's got to stay in the parameters of the teacher packet and what's been taught to them. He can't break up his own thing. They wouldn't have him sitting there as an emissary or ambassador if he wasn't going to stay to the mindset of what Nate's teaching. That's what he's going after. He's going after what Nate has taught them. They have to follow that strict outline of this is what you say when this comes up. This is what you say when this comes up. Okay? But we speak on precept because we don't have to worry about staying to a guideline because the precepts are going to link themselves up. That's why we go in the spirit. That's why we say Rachak Wadash, because we don't have lessons written down. Sometimes we go off of a list. Other times we let the Spirit flow, because you don't have to worry about staying in an agenda if you're pushing the truth. The scriptures are going to marry what you're saying, and they're going to marry the topic that you're preaching or you're teaching on. Okay? So let's keep going down there, and it says, but not to true righteousness, making them twice the child of hell. It says, for their eyes they have closed, lest they should see with their eyes and hear with their ears and understand with their hearts and turn and would heal them. And that's what that's why these guys aren't going to be healed. Yahbashim Yahushua is not going to heal these guys, because they're refusing to come after Yahbashim Yahushua in the straight gate. Okay? That's what you see taking forth. And you got the 4th, the 6th. You can go through all these. It's a good read, but I just found that funny that the same way Yahushua was cutting these guys, IUIC is getting dealt with today, because we have the Spirit of Yahushua with us unto the ends of the earth, and we have the mind of Yahushua. So if we have the mind of Yahushua, let's get that real quick. Let me get that. Because we have this mind, because the same mind that was in him is in us today. All right, let's read in the NLT. It says, for who can know the Lord's thoughts? Who knows enough to teach him? But we understand these things, for we have the mind of the Messiah, okay, the Mashiach. That's how we're able to teach these things. That's how we're able to go after the knowledge, wisdom, and understanding on the level that we do, because we're being inspired by Yahushua the same way Paul was inspired and taught by Yahushua to go through the scriptures and to navigate through the word in the way that he did. So that's the time we are now. I just wanted to bring that information out. I might touch again, go into some of these other ones, but you brothers definitely read it and see that the Lord was cursing these guys out, and it's happening again. All right, so with that, I say call hello, Yahweh, Ba'ashem, Yahushai, Ba'ashem Chakwadash. Till the next time, I say shalom, and more not and never keep faith. Shalom.